All right. Hello, everyone. Tyler James is here with another great comics launch interview. I'm excited. I have Felipe Cagno with me today, and he is going to share a ton of awesome advice and experience from his 19 successful Kickstarter campaigns, as well as a whole lot more. Before we dive into that, I do want to let and remind those of you guys that have been checking out the podcast or the streams about a resource that we have that not everyone has gone and grabbed. You can actually go over to comicslaunch.com/funded to get our Comics Launch Kickstarter strategy guide. It has strategies from a whole bunch of really talented comic creators of all levels. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback on this guide from creators that have checked it out. So definitely check that out if you get a chance. All right. So I'm getting ready to bring on our guest for today. If you give me just a sec. Here we go. All right. My guest today is an accomplished writer of film and comic books and shorts and games. He's a veteran of 19 Kickstarter campaigns, and he's probably best known for, among them, the successful 3-2-1 Fast comic anthologies, as well as the long-running and wildly successful The Few and Cursed series of books and graphic novels. He's also currently working on a project called One-Eyed Jack, which is a series with CSI creator Anthony E. Zucker, among other awesome projects. So welcome to Comics Launch, Felipe Cagno. How you doing, Felipe?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, and congrats on getting my name right. I like that.
Yeah, it's. I will probably I'll probably pronounce it a dozen different ways before the show is over. So
they all work. They all work.
I won't take my victory lap yet, but I'm glad you're here. You're someone who I've always seen your projects, and I've always been impressed by the work that you've been putting out on the Kickstarter platform and elsewhere. And so I'm excited to finally pull you on the Comics Launch podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. And hey, I love sharing my emotional roller coaster that is called Kickstarter experience, because it is a roller coaster,
Yeah, it's certainly
brace for impact.
It certainly is. And, one of the things that I think makes the roller coaster a little bit easier is when your project shows up on the top of that Kickstarter page. If you're like me and you back a lot of Kickstarter projects, you've probably been seeing the latest from the Few and Cursed series.
Yep.
So before we get into sort of your background and how you got to this point and all the things, let's just not bury the lead. Talk a little bit about this new launch that you have up. It's for the Few and Cursed, heart-shaped ambition. And but I realize this is the 13th, it looks like from my count, the 13th The Few and Cursed launch. But for those that have been living under a rock, can you just give a brief introduction to what the series as a whole is?
Sure.
And then also what's special about this new book that you're launching?
Look, I'll take your word for it. If you say it's number 13, it's number 13. I really don't know.
But who's counting?
Who's counting? But yeah, so it's funny because there's this phrase from Uncharted that I love, which is greatness from small beginnings. And The Few and Cursed certainly has a small beginning. I never envisioned The Few and Cursed as anything but a fun single story, but it sort of organically grew to what is now literally a tapestry of stories and all these different characters that are just going to, starting relating to one another, and there's a lot of lore or world building behind this. And so the Few and Cursed, it's a supernatural Western set in early 20th century, so around 1900s. But as much as it is a supernatural Western, it's also post-apocalyptic. So at some point in 1840 something, in a mysterious event, we never go into detail, most of the water on Earth was just gone overnight. So the world sort of got stuck in that setting of the Old West. But with water being so rare that it's used as currency. You can cross the Pacific on horseback, and on top of that, you have all these monsters and folklore and legends, and coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
So that's the general lines behind the Thinkers, and we started off with the main. I mean, you can call it the main series, but we started off with The Crows of Manaulana, which is the first story that we did, which introduces the character of the redhead. She's a curse chaser, and pits her against these gigantic crows that kidnap children at night. So that was our very first entry point into this world. We then did Chronicles of the Thinkers, which is like a bunch of short stories in this universe showing all these different parts of the world. So the Caribbean, Iraq or Persia, how it was known at the time, the Outback, the Australian Outback. So all these different parts of the world, we had short stories in Chronicles. Then we did Shadow Nation, which is a completely unrelated story as far as connecting to Chronicles and the Redhead. But then again, because it's all happening in the same timeline and the same world, I'm just leaving little breadcrumbs for people to follow, and hopefully by the time we're going to be done with everything that we want to do, there's going to be this beautiful tapestry, with all these different books. And Heart-Shaped Ambition is just another thread in this tapestry. It's a book that takes place 200 years before the phenomena that dried up the world. So it's basically your swashbuckling high sea adventures, but with some of the trademarks that make the Thinkers be the Thinkers. So you have world building, you have lore, you have these mysterious creatures that we're saving for people that are going to read the book. And the main character of Heart-Shaped Ambition is actually this captain pirate called Bartholomew, which we introduced as a very complex and interesting character in Chronicles. He's a pirate that always wanted to find the fountain of life to become immortal. And so he could, sail the seven seas for eternity. And he did for 200 years until the world dried up. And then he was just a captain without seas. So it just struck me as a very interesting take on a pirate captain character. So Heart-Shaped Ambition is going to show his origin story. So where does he come from? How does he find the fountain? And how does that impact the lore of the Thinkers? I've been saying this for a little while now, that while it might seem that Heart-Shaped Ambition is not really connected to the Redhead and everything that we're doing in present day within the Thinker series, it will be a book that's going to impact not only Red, but everything that we're going to do from this point forward. So it's a big one.
Yeah, and it seems like your fan base has come out for it big time as well. So that's always great to see. I know that can be a little bit of a challenge for spinoffs, right? And spinoffs for wanting people to come back to it, but to give them a little bit of something that they didn't expect. There's a creator in sort of our community, Rob Moltari. I know he's working on a spinoff that's in the same universe, and it's a character that was in the first book, but he's still like, it feels like he's starting from scratch. And then when it comes to a Kickstarter campaign, like when you have past campaigns under your belt, sometimes you have sort of the scenario where you have so much stuff that you could potentially offer or craft with rewards or other things that you feel like you might risk overwhelming backers and things like that with how much that you could offer, or how to even just display it on the page and things like that. So I'm curious, as you've been doing projects like this, like how do you get that balance right?
It's definitely a challenge. Right? It was a challenge putting together the Kickstarter page for this one, because if you scroll down the page, you start seeing that you have multiple books. So far, we have 4 different books that sort of encompass everything that we've ever published in this universe. So you have the trade collecting the Crow's full story arc. You have Shadow Nation, you have Chronicles, and now you have Heart-Shaped Ambition. And I was just trying to be as clear as possible. So I try to introduce one book at a time, and I try to sort of set up the reward tiers in ways that would not only cater, old fans, but new ones as well. So people that have gotten, for instance, just the Crow's storyline, but they want to get all the other 3 books, I had to come up with a tier for that. There might be someone that backed Shadow Nation and the Red Hat Crow's adventure, but they're still missing Chronicles and the newly released Heart-Shaped Ambition, so there's another tier for that. And then by the time I was done, it felt a little bit confusing. So one of the ways that I try as best as possible to navigate this is I'm always available. Like usually I answer all my DMs or comments or anything really within Kickstarter in the first, 24 hours. I try not to let that lapse. And again, just trying to be as descriptive as possible and having as many images as possible, because a lot of people, they don't just read what's written. They just want to see the images. So I post the covers for all books. So if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the covers and you see like little blurbs about each one of them. And even still, I can see how that can be confusing. And make no mistake, like you said, spin-offs are always challenging. Okay, like so the big draw for the Fin Curse is the Red Hat. And whenever she's, front and center, there's a lot more attention. There's a lot more eyeballs,
Yeah, we've seen that there are certain images on a Kickstarter platform or crowdfunding or just online that they're going to get some clicks.
Exactly.
And they're usually, involve attractive females and female bodies. So,
but yeah,
so Grizzly Pirates, you had a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, I just try to sort of, beat the drum of the pirate thing. So the pirate angle. But in all fairness, like the reason that there is this character that we're calling it the Red Death. She's like a death version of the Red Hat, which is pretty mysterious. Like I have a lot of people trying to guess who that character is. What does that character do? Like where does the character fit in all of this? And again, I'm just, planting seeds and leaving breadcrumbs. So eventually we circle back to that. So, but with all that said, I did use the Red Death image sort of to connect this book, Heart-Shaped Ambition, to the Few and Cursed, so people know that they're pledging for a Few and Cursed book. It's something similar that, I don't know if you remember, but the first Ant-Man movie that came out, you had these posters with Thor's hammer or the Iron Man mask or the Cap shield, and then you had this little Ant-Man on top of those things. I think it's the same concept, that Marvel has done it in the past. Like, okay, so we have to market Ant-Man. Nobody knows about him. Yeah. Let's use our big guns,
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, just about every Marvel character didn't first appear in their own book. They were a side character on a side quest, and then they come in. And I mean, you see that in music, like hip hop, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before you're going to do your album, you're going to be on, a featured guest on other people's albums. And so like, I love that you recognized and acknowledged, hey, there are some trappings that people associate with this IP. How can we get creative, even though it's a different era, even though it's a different style? How can we get creative? I think that's a brilliant approach. Yeah. And I also love and I'm jealous of creators that have been able to find a world or a universe that feels fresh, feels unique, but also is, but they've been able to find ways that even though there's like a bunch of different constraints to it, you've kind of established that in the Few and Cursed universe, I can tell different kinds of stories.
Yeah.
right? You can tell a pirate story. You can tell a Western. You could probably, if you so choose to go there, and you could tell a future story 100 years later, right? Like you could do a cyberpunk like assuming the world doesn't end by then, right? Because you've sort of established that. And I think that's a great place to be as a creator, because like there is an advantage, as you've probably seen, launching other books, but there is an advantage to having just that established brand that then you can spin off to, as opposed to creating something else wholly from new cloth every single time, right?
And to that point, like I said, the universe grew very organically. So I think that was actually very positive. Like from everything that I've written in my life in the past, I've always tried to be like this megalomaniac, creator with all these different characters. And the Fin Curse was the one that sort of really walked on its own, because when I first started creating it and writing about it, it was just one story with one character going against one curse, and then it just happened very naturally. And I think that's the right approach. You don't wanna put, I don't know, like the cart in front of and I think that's the advantage of the Fin Curse, is that first we introduced Red in a short 3-page story. We liked her so much that Fabiano, the co-creator, he was like, "Hey, I love this character. We got to do more stuff with her." And then we came up with the Crow's storyline. And then along the way, I met Mike Nade from Rock Commander Games. He got interested in turning the Fin Curse into a board game. And he was the one that was like, "Hey, but I need more characters." And that's how Chronicles came to be. And then from Chronicles, Bartholomew was born. And from the board game, Laverne was born. And she's the star of Shadow Nation. So it's like I didn't waste any time planning and just getting to that perfect sweet spot where a creator might be confident enough to be like, "Oh, okay, so now I can publish my Opus Dei, my magnum opus, my masterpiece." It just happened.
I have to say that's actually I think that is actually brilliant advice, and something I actually wanted to give you credit for, and also let you talk a little bit about. But just this power of starting small and starting for strategic. Your first sort of foray into Kickstarter, from what I could tell, was with those 3-2-1 fast comic anthologies, which I think are just a perfect example of, like, as a writer, realizing that one of the things that will free you up more than anything else is actually establishing constraints on what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Like, so the concept of 3-2-1. Can you just remind anyone that hadn't, or tell everyone that hadn't heard about it, like, what was the conceit of that project, and what did that open up for you or allow you to do that maybe if it was just an open-ended anthology you might have struggled with? Right.
Well, that's the thing. While the 3-2-1 Fast Comics campaigns were my first into Kickstarter, they were not my first book. The 3-2-1 was born out of my experience with something else that I've done called The Lost Kids. So The Lost Kids, it was something that I was writing for years, ever since I was like a teenager. And it was heavily influenced by Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, all those classic JRPG games.
Yep.
And I would just spend hours and hours developing characters and arcs and places, and we had maps, and then I got to film school, and they wrote that as a film script, which was well over 120 pages. And then I heard the best advice I could ever get, which is like, "Oh, okay, so you're this young Brazilian writer with a fantasy over 2-hour long script. Will never fly. You should, turn this into something else." And then I tried to turn that into a comic book, and it was so challenging. It was so big. So my very first graphic novel was just this 200+ page book that took years to complete. So by the time I was done with that, I was like, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this again. I'm not spending 5 years, 3 years, I don't know how long, working on one book. And that's how 321 Fast Comics came to be. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do short stories. They're all going to have 3 pages, 2 characters, and 1 twist ending. I wanted that twist ending in there to sort of to exercise my skills as a writer. I wanted that challenge. You know, how do you surprise readers when in just such a short amount of space? You know, just 3 pages, but you gotta surprise them somehow.
So how do you surprise readers in 3 pages?
Well, that's the trick. Is you write the story from end to beginning, so you write it backwards. So you come up with the ending, and then you just sort of you work your way back to the plot. You start with the payoff, and you work your way back to the setup.
Yeah.
That was how 321 was born. I just wanted to work with as many artists as possible, and get this out of my system as quickly as possible. So the first 321 took me like 8 months to do it. You know.
Well, and one of the things that I've noticed that is a through line for your projects is that the level of art is just absolutely so freaking good. and you've worked with talented artists. Can you just speak to, because like, and I think for some writers might be like, well, it's not fair because like in the world of comics, the thing that is so important, I have no control over, but somehow you've managed as a writer to have everything that's like associated with your name look freaking unbelievably good. So talk a little bit about that. How important is that for a writer, and actually how have you been able to attract such great talent?
Sure. I love the saying that you get someone to pick up a book because of the art, but they keep reading it because of the writing. So it's the perfect marriage. You cannot have one without the other. You know, it doesn't matter if you have the best artist working on a book if the story is not going to hold. So and that's one thing. So make sure that I hate the discussion like, oh, what's more important in a comic book, the art or the story? There's no more important. It's the perfect marriage. You need both. Right. It's like faith and reasoning. There are 2 different shoes, and you can walk with just one of them, but you're going to be limping all the way through. If you have both on, that's where you're going to find your stride. And as far as having worked with so many talented people, like that, I'm just fortunate to be, to have been born and raised in Brazil. Brazil is an amazing, cradle for talent. It's just this amazing backyard for amazing artists.
And why is it like? Can you, for those of us that don't live in Brazil, but I have been blown away at whenever I put out like an open call for talent, Brazil, Argentina, like South America, just some incredible creators in there, and it makes me like, is there a big comic scene down there, like, or what's it like, and where does this come from?
Yeah, so I cannot speak for Argentina, but I can speak for Brazil. So I think what happened.
Sorry for.
So the history of comics in Brazil. First, we have a very rich history with comics in Brazil. It's like it's something that's always been popular. My dad grew up reading Disney comics, and he shared that passion with me. In the 80s or 70s, something like that, we had this amazing creative genius called Mauricio de Souza. He came up with what literally every single child in Brazil reads. Like, you're born in Brazil, you're going to read Monica's Gang, up to this day. Like, he's the Stan Lee, Walt Disney of comics in Brazil. And he's probably one of the most successful comic book people in the world, just because of the sheer amount of success and talent that he's got in Brazil. And so not only that, but we've had Marvel and DC comics being published in Brazil ever since the 60s and 70s as well, the classic European ones. So as far as reading comics, Brazil has always been very receptive of those things. And I think the reason that we have so many talented artists as well is because in the early 90s, we had a couple of people that sort of broke into comics in the US, mainly Roger Cruz, Marcelo Campos, Klebs. Like I can name names here and spend like the next hour naming names.
Yeah.
And what these people did was not only did they break into the industry, in the US industry, they shared their experience and they all started sort of teaching newer and newer generations. And that's amazing. It wasn't the case of like a creator making it big and sort of holding on very selfishly to that talent or that experience. So we have literally all over Brazil, you have this comic book focused schools of art. People go to school here in São Paulo, up north in the Northeast, in the South with Daniel HDR, in Minas. So all over the country, you have these specialized schools being taught by people that made it into the industry. And the more people made into the US industry, the more people they trained in the newer generations. It's no surprise that today you have like big names both at Marvel and DC, like Mike Deodato or Ivan Reis and Joe Prado. You have all these people. And Joe, for instance, he's been one of the greatest champions of Brazilian artists making it into the US. He started Chiaro Studios, which is this agency / production studio of sorts. And he has a very good relationship with DC. So he's always bringing new Brazilian talent into DC, and then from DC they move it to Marvel, to Image. So you have like this sort of champions. I try to do my part. I always try to find talent, new talent for my books. I'm always working with new people, and like I said, it's just an endless resource of talents, here in Brazil as far as art and now writing as well. You have some amazing books coming out of Brazil. So it's not just art, it's the whole comic book scene,
Yeah, that's great to hear and great to see how it has been sort of, a virtuous circle of giving back and building up and taking over world domination. So talk to me, speaking of that and sort of working and more of a team mentality, what's it like working with a team to develop your IP, especially when it's a story that you said, well, this wasn't really it wasn't intended to be anything bigger than just, one story from the beginning. I know there's a lot of creators out there that listen to this show that have big visions for themselves and for the stuff that they're creating. They see big world spin-offs, but they sort of get to the point like, wait a minute, there's only 24 hours in a day and I need to sleep some of them. I can't do it all myself. So how is sort of that worked? What made you decide that, okay, we're going to bring on, work with writers to flesh out certain things, or we're going to, expand the universe. And to do that, we need to expand the team, and you're going to have to, let go of a little bit of control or choose what you're controlling. Like, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think as far as the Fearing Curse, the very first true collaboration with a writer is Heart Shaped Ambition. Like, I'm very fortunate to be working with Carlos. He's an amazing talent. And in fact, when I pitched him the book, I sort of just gave him the guideline. Basically, I gave him the short story that we had done for Chronicles. Oh, so there's this Captain Pirate. He finds the Fountain of Life, becomes immortal, and then the seas dry up. Just run with it, Carlos. And I think that's what it's all about. It's collaborating more so than controlling, and the more freedom that I gave Carlos, the better the story was turning out, and the more connected with everything else we were doing it started to become. Like we've had conversations, like 3-hour conversations about like what is the lore of the Fearing Curse, where's this going? Like me as a creator, now that the Fearing Curse has become this tapestry of different narratives, I know exactly where we want to go with this and the stories I want to tell for the next, 5 to 10 years. Like we have sort of that, I wouldn't say planned out, but certainly plotted out or mapped out. Like, we know our little islands amidst the vast ocean, you know. And once I shared a lot of that with Carlos, he started, you know, bringing stuff back, and it's been a true collaboration in that sense that we sort of feed off of each other, you know. And I felt that was the right moment, exactly because the more I started writing or sort of having ideas for the Funiverse universe, I started realizing I don't have time to do it on my own. I just don't. You know, there's so much I want to tell with this universe right now that I'm gonna need help. And then I was very careful about choosing who did I want to work with first, and that's why I brought in Carlos and Pedro. They've done some of the best graphic novels that came out in Brazil for the past like 4 or 5 years. I was very excited to sort of do something with them, and I was just happy that the thing that we did together was, you know, an entry into the Funiverse universe.
Absolutely, that's awesome, and you know, it is always a real treat to find a like mind, whether it's your artist partner or a co-writer that like is it like thinks about and puts as much thought and energy into a creative idea, because that all that does is then fuel even more for you. And when you have multiple people looking at a world or a universe and putting a lot of energy into it, it can't help but get bigger and better. So I love that.
Yeah, I think I just remember something that I think it might be very interesting. One of the things that really unlocked Carlos' creativity in dealing with the Funiverse was actually something that we drew from the board game, which was also something that Mike, as a game designer, brought to the table, which was the notion that curses might not be all bad. You know, if you know how to use curses, you can use them to your advantage. And that's a big part of the board game experience. Like when you play the Funiverse board game, you're always struggling whether you want to curse yourself or you want to get rid of the curse that's upon you. And as soon as I gave that notion to Carlos, he was like, man, I love this, because we immediately think that curses are a bad thing. You know, oh, you're cursed. You got to get rid of it, you know?
Yeah.
And that sort of played a very big role within Heart-Shaped Ambition, you know? And again, it's not, I think the key word is collaborating. Allow people around you to give you ideas and be free about giving them. You don't want to create an environment where people are going to be sort of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this, or maybe I shouldn't do this. Just, you know, let it rip, you know, like it's always easier to go bigger and then reel it back in, that just to sort of like be that confined space, you know, that sort of suffocates creativity, you know. So Carlos was free to come up with any and all ideas that he wanted, and I was just sort of guiding him. Oh, this fits, this doesn't fit, this is pretty cool, I don't think this is the right place to do this. So it was really a back and forth collaboration between us.
Awesome. So back to the latest Kickstarter campaign, and you know, a lot of our listeners have big heart-shaped ambition for their Kickstarter launches. But you know, 1,300 plus backers, with still 56 hours to go, a lot of time on the clock. Like, that's a big launch. That's a lot of people driving it. And I'm curious, like, you know, Kickstarter veteran, obviously you've got a big audience of past backers that you can market to, but it still is important to actually get people to your Kickstarter page and pick up some new fans. So I'm just curious, like, in terms of promoting and driving traffic throughout a launch, like I noticed that, or I know that you've worked with like BackerKit marketing, for example. And so, you know, some of the things that you do besides being on podcasts like this and promoting and obviously being receptive to backers, but what are some of the things that really work for you to drive traffic, and what are your experiences been in order to get people to back?
Sure. I think the important thing here is to not think of these backers as customers or backers. I feel like we're building a community here, you know, like, and I really feel that nurturing that relationship, it's the most important thing. And that's why people keep coming back. And the sort of the secret sauce behind the Kickstarter is like, the more you get people to back, it doesn't matter how much they pledge, the more prominent you're going to be within the category. So if you drive enough traffic through your Kickstarter page, that means that you're going to be featured higher on the Kickstarter page, and that means more people. So it's sort of like one thing starts feeding off each other. It's just and then it's this snowball effect, and then it sort of takes out on its own. It takes off on its own, But granted, like if you go through my list of projects, you can see that there's growth there. I didn't start with 1,000 backers. I started with, I think, like 300 backers on the first campaign, and then the following one I did 500, and then the other I did 700, and then it grew from there. And it grew exactly because I'm always looking to nurture that relationship with backers and sort of like being approachable. Like I always tell people, don't leave unanswered comments on a page, even if it's the biggest critique, nastiest comment you get. Make sure you respectfully, you respectfully address whatever concerns they have. Like people want to be heard. We all have voices, and I think it's important to give them the space for them to voice their concerns, if any, or compliments. I think you need to really understand that Kickstarter is an environment, and you need to take care of it very, very carefully. So the reason that you see that there's audience growth, and obviously the more audience you have from one project to another, the more people you have to market your book. So, and then to be completely honest, I do try to reach those people more so than, for instance, doing a PR and blasting that off to, I don't know, like 100 websites. I think it's much more effective to sort of talk to your audience that you've been building, and have them bring in people. That's important. Word of mouth. So if someone backed your project and they felt that they're part of something, and they feel that they not only get a good product in their house with extras and stuff like that, they're going to be telling people. They're going to be like, hey, this book is awesome. And the creator, dude, he's amazing. He's always talking to us. So
and handsome.
And handsome, So it's a relationship, and I try to cherish that as much as possible. Like, for instance, like I took the weekend off. I was just feeling a bit drained. So by the time I came back Monday morning, I had over a dozen messages on Kickstarter. I made sure to just spend an hour going through every single one of them and just answering every single one of them, no matter what they were talking about. They like, most people are just like, hey, I love your book. That's awesome. Thank you. And I was like, yeah, man, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Thank you so much for backing. So that's for me what's the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a number of veterans that I work with in terms of people that have had some success on Kickstarter building the fan base. They're able to get their newsletter out and get the other things out, and now they're sort of like, okay, well, should I look into like adding some paid marketing or paid advertising to this, or Facebook ads and other things? How did you sort of come around to, all right? Because I know for a lot of creators, like, paying for advertising, like scary stuff, even though just about every business out there does it. But for comics, it can be, and creators out there, like, what kind of process did you go through to be like, okay, how can I really blow this up, and or to help out or contribute? Just thoughts and or experience.
So I did use backer kit ads. Already, I think I've done it for like 3 times, and I got mixed results. So I have one that was absolutely amazing, which was the Red Hat front and center. It was for the trade paperback. That one was just beautiful to see. Then we did for One Eye Jack, which it's a completely different kind of book. So the experience there wasn't all that great. And now I've done it again for the Pirates. And then we just realized that, so the Red Hat she draws eyeballs. She's the star. And then the reason that so two things of note here is that first, I've always tried using paid ads on my own. So I always paid for a little bit on Facebook and Instagram. I would just post something and just, pay couple $100 there to see how far that would go, what would be the result. I was very, like every other creator was there, I was always very reluctant to actually hire, for instance, Backer Kit Ads, which is a specialized agency to do this thing for me. So I'll be honest, I did it when the trade paperback campaign was off to a horrid start. It was completely blew my expectations. I was like, oh, okay, so now I can be a little bit risky with everything that we're doing. And I was glad that I did, because it was such a positive experience. And it made me realize that I didn't know squat about what I was doing. As much as Facebook and Instagram sort of guide you through using their advertising system, man, it's a whole science. It's just engineering.
It absolutely is. And then the other thing that's sort of like the Backer Kit special sauce is they also have been building these audiences that are their audiences that have gone through their software. So when it comes to targeting, like they can really put it in front of people that back, right?
They know what they're doing,
and that was something that I discovered or noticed using the Backer Kit launch tool. And I don't know if you used that one yet, but I looked at like, all right, marketing towards past Kickstarter backers, and then even marketing towards past customers but have never backed us on Kickstarter. And I've found that people that back on Kickstarter are so much more likely to back again on Kickstarter. Yeah. If people haven't backed for you on Kickstarter, it is a tougher sell to get them to come on over. So
absolutely,
being able to do that kind of micro targeting is pretty special. So I've got to ask, and again, we've been going for a while now, so I won't keep you all day, because I know you've probably got more messages to return and drums to beat. But I also want to ask, the downside of, if there's quote unquote downside of campaigns like this, is 1,371 backers. That's a lot of product to send to human beings all across the world. And so I'm curious, as you've been able to scale up your campaigns, like, do you have fulfillment tips for how you've been able to, grow and organize and deliver on the promises that you make during these Kickstarters?
So before we get into fulfillment, let me just say that the bigger the campaign, the bigger the emotional toll. Because like I always say, that you have this it's a roller coaster, because at any moment backers can either choose to upgrade their pledges, downgrade, or just flat out cancel.
Yeah. And
I've had days in these bigger campaigns that I've had, I don't know, people canceling over $500 in pledges. Like one guy cancels their 200 plus pledge, the other one 100, the other one 50, and it's like, those days is like, oh my God, it feels like you're doing something wrong, because I know it's a coincidence when that happens, where like 4 or 5 big rollers just cancel their pledges on that very same day. But the truth is that you get cancellations every day, and they are statistically proportional to the size of your campaign. So obviously, the smaller the campaign, the less cancellations you have.
Right. And it's also because, like, if you are doing paid traffic, you are reaching more people. You're on the front page of Kickstarter. You get more people to click on that page. Well, the connection that you have, the personal connection that you have to the average person on there, is much less than if, hey, you've got 100 people on an email list that you've been emailing for a year, and all 100 of them come to your page, and that's it. Like, those people are, they love you already.
I just keep telling everyone that just brace yourself, because no matter how big or how small your Kickstarter is, there are days and days. There are days which something awesome happens, and you're like, oh my God, this is working out. And then there's going to be days which is like, oh, okay, so you gotta learn how to take the losses as much as the wins.
Yeah.
And as far as fulfillment, you gotta be really well organized. But more so than that, people are willing to wait however long it needs if you're transparent with them, if you keep them in the loop, if you address their concerns, if you're polite, you're politely reminding them. Like, not everyone gets our updates in their emails. Some people be like, hey, I didn't get my rewards, what's going on? Just remember there's a person on the other end, this side of the screen, and just be like, hey, you're probably not getting the updates, but here's their updates tab, here's what's going on. I try to update backers at least once a month. Hey guys, so this is what's going on. And look, whenever you're fulfilling a Kickstarter, especially with comic books, you have so many spinning wheels. Like you have printers, you have artists, you have the ship. Like I print my stuff in China, so you have to deal with freight forwarders, and you have to deal with ships, and so there's all that going on, and you as the creator, you have no control about those things. What you can control, though, is what do you do with information when your printers say, hey, there's no paper in the market, we're going to have to wait a week or a couple of weeks to buy paper to print your book. So you as a creator, you have that piece of information. What are you going to do with it? Do you just go radio silent, or do you share that with your audience? I always choose to share. Like, maybe I share too much, but it works for me. Like if you go through any of my Kickstarters, as much as most of them suffer delays in fulfillment because of one reason or another, it's very rare that you'll find a negative comment. Very rare. I'd say, I don't know, if you go through my comments walls on every single other project I've done, I don't think you're going to be finding anything negative in there, just because people understand. They understand you're an independent creator, and they understand you're doing your best. But you as a creator need to show them that you're doing your best, and be completely transparent and open about everything that's going on. So I'd say that more so than the logistics of whatever it is you're fulfilling, I think it's again, it goes back to the community, the relationship, and just nurturing that. I think that would be my greatest tip.
That is a great tip. And the reservoir of goodwill from backers tends to be pretty high, as long as you sort of respect that. And I think you're absolutely right that end of the day, backers aren't going to remember if your project was exactly on time or a couple months late, but they will remember, how you carried yourself, how your honesty, your transparency, and other things. So that's definitely great to remember.
And of course, make sure that you do deliver what you set out to deliver. There's also that. Like if you say you're going to publish a 232-page book, make sure you send a 232-page book. I mean, that goes without saying, but
yeah,
I've seen people that I've seen other. I'm not even talking about comic book creators. I'm just saying I've seen other Kickstarters out there that never fulfilled their Kickstarter, that for years complete radio silence. It feels that they just took your money and ran with it. And there's also Kickstarters that once a year be like, hey, so yeah, we'll eventually get to it. Don't have that attitude, it's the sort of attitude that I've seen people be like, oh, it's happening, but there's no news, there's nothing posted, and then you check out that person on Instagram, for instance, and they're working on something completely different.
Yeah, so even worse, raising money for something completely different.
It's like, what's going on here? Why you're working on that book and you have my book to, then I share the sentiment with frustrated backers, like my stuff might get delayed, but I always make a point to show people that I'm working effectively working on it,
Yeah. All great points. Well, Felipe, this has been great talking to you, and congrats on all of the success. I'm curious, just before we we take off, what's next? What's after this one is in the books and working towards getting this out the door? What more do you have in store for us in the coming months?
Well, Red's gonna be back. I think we all miss her, so she's gonna be back. That's
dancing with the one that brought you to the dance, right?
That's all I want to say. She's gonna be back, and she's gonna be back in a very big way. I'm super excited about that. So
awesome.
There's a lot going on with the Thinkers, and it's not just comic books.
Great. And besides the Kickstarter, what's the best place for listeners to connect with you?
They can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Just make sure to find me over there, Felipe Cagno. As far as I know, I'm the only one. It's not like you're gonna find a lot of John Smiths out there.
The only one making comics.
But yeah, I think if people search for Felipe Cagno in Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, they're gonna find me. But I'm pretty active on Kickstarter as well. So I always tell people, if you want to follow me on Kickstarter as well, there's that nifty button, like follow the creator, underneath my picture on my profile page over there. So that's always a good place to follow me as well, because then you get a ping on your phone every time I launch something new.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Felipe. Good luck with the rest of the launch. The book is The Few and Cursed, Heart-Shaped Ambition. It's on Kickstarter right now. And we want to thank everyone else that has tuned in and watched us today. And good luck with the rest of your launches, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely.